Namaste. There are ideas, concepts, and frameworks that keep working on a daily basis. While they appear very simple to us, they often leave us in dilemmas when it comes to their application usage. When we speak to experts, wise people, we get to demystify these ideas and make them usable and apply them profitably. Welcome to Mentor Podcast. Sushanta Banerjee is an organization development expert. He's worked with for-profit as well as not-for-profit organizations. Sushanta works on organization fitness and energy, and that is how he calls organization development as a discipline. He is the co-founder of Sumedhas, the Academy for Human Context, the premier organization in human process work. A curious and a kind soul, Sushanta has the wisdom to open us to the potential of human process work, organization fitness, and channelizing human energy in organizations. Sushanta is an alumnus of IIT Delhi and IIM Ahmedabad. He has devoted the last 5 decades of his life to raising levels of human consciousness and creative action in all spheres of life. I have been significantly inspired and influenced by his persona and thinking. It is always a blessing to be in conversation with him. Please join me.
Let's begin.
I have known you as an organization development expert, both working in foreign not-for-profits significantly. But I was curious with your use of this term organization fitness. What is that? Can you elaborate a little bit? Can you throw some light on that, sir?
Yes, maybe first talking for the benefit of those in the audience who have heard the term organization development, but may not have experienced it. This is one area in which there's lots of mysteries that lie around, lots of gray areas that lie around, and it's not quite as clear as the management sciences. So let us spend a few minutes talking about organization development itself. As we know from the 50s, 60s, early 60s onwards, in the West, there was a movement to try and humanize organizations. Until then, like Rollo May talks about in his book, the iron fist of the Victorian era leaders ran organizations.
Yeah.
This iron fist had to be taken away.
Okay.
But had to be taken away carefully, such that it doesn't create too much of a disturbance. So, starting with the Hawthorne experiments, where they discovered, that I think everybody must be knowing it. They said the lighting is not enough in a workplace. So there were workers sitting at a table doing some detailed work, and the lighting is not enough. So they created a control room and a regular with a lit room.
Yeah.
So as they started this, they improved the lighting in that experimental room, and they had the control room which was the same as previous lighting. And they discovered, as they were doing this study, they discovered that in both of them the performance improved.
Okay.
So they were very foxed. How is this happening? And then they realized that the mere act of giving attention to the workers was increasing the levels of efficiency and energy. So they were doing the work better. All right. So we have something else, huge pointer here.
Yeah.
And which is why in my theory work, the first thing I state in the theory is attention is everything. That is the Mula Mantra. You and I are here. It's unlike what Descartes had said, I think, therefore I am.
Yeah.
I exist because I have attention.
Fabulous.
Or the other way around, because I exist, I have attention.
Yeah,
And this attention is everything in terms of how it creates my life.
correct.
So, not receiving attention for a child, for instance, is the worst thing that can happen to the child. So on and so forth. So, organization development started with this business of humanizing because, for instance, in the early days of industrial era, and
Mm.
there are some the best way to understand what is happening in the society that time is actually to read novels. There are several novels of that era. Charles Dickens is one of them. I don't remember the name of the novel. Gory life, 10 to 12 hours of factory work
Mm.
under terrible conditions. Even now, factory work is not really very conducive to
Yeah,
health.
it's become a lot better though, but
Yeah,
it's certainly, yeah,
certainly it is a challenging. It is a challenge.
yeah.
So there was this move of bringing in better and better methods so people would work better
Mm.
and less costly on their mental and physical well-being. This was happening. Along with that, in the 50s, late 40s actually it started, there was this whole concern with race relations. For instance, even until as late as the late 50s,
Mm.
black musicians weren't allowed to perform in public. The black and white relationships became the issues. That is when they started developing new methods, including one method which evolved little by accident. I won't go into the details of it, it's there in the history books. A group of social scientists who were engaging in long discussions with both black groups and white groups.
Mm.
And at the end of the day, they would reassemble, these social scientists would reassemble and discuss amongst themselves. And for some reason, they started recording it. And when they played the recording back, they said, "My God, I was saying this. How on earth? Something which I don't want to say, but I'm saying it. Yeah,
Mm.
or something which I said, which I never imagined I was saying it. It's so good." So there's a whole business of becoming aware of their own behavior. That was one significant way. And then through the usual channels of Harvard and MIT, etc., this got started getting added on to organizations.
Mm.
So very famous people like Chris Argyris,
Mm.
such like people who were psychologists to begin with. There's a very beautiful article called Barriers and Gateways to Communications, for instance.
Barriers
Yeah.
and ways to communicate.
So human relations and human behavior as something which ought to be part of the management of organizations began to take birth.
Wonderful. In fact,
And
I'm sensing something a lot more profound as I'm listening to you.
yeah,
It was not just about the human being and behavior. I think a recognition of human consciousness at a larger level seems to
yeah,
be what is coming
yeah,
through, isn't it?
yeah. Now, now cut to homeland here in India.
Okay.
Industrialization was obviously going on at its own snail pace.
Mm.
And then post independence, the government realized that without industrialization, we'll be in trouble.
Yeah.
And it was too slow to hope for rural economies to build up and so on. So industrialization began, IITs got formed, and there was a race for it. All management technologies were coming from the West, but there's a situation in the context. I'm cutting to a third aspect now, and that is this idea of listening to their own voices that these social scientists had done
Mm.
was saying what? Become aware of yourselves. And when you become aware of yourself through a non guilt provoking, non shaming,
Yeah.
non punishing,
Correct.
three very important. No shame, no guilt, no punishment.
Okay.
Yeah. Something happens in our minds.
Absolutely.
Now, this is important for us to note here, although it is not much in the published domain yet. This idea of seeing oneself
Mm.
from a point of view which is neither shame, guilt, or punishment provoking, and its huge potency, therefore, it alters the inner perceptive mechanisms, is very close to the concept of the Sakshi and the Drashta
Drashta.
in Sanatan discourse.
Correct. Correct.
Yeah. Yogic, Buddhist, wherever you go. This Drashta is a very powerful, it's in fact one of the most beautiful and elegant contributions in the world of philosophy and social sciences, behavioral sciences, psychology. that India has made to the world.
Mm.
It is yet to find its place in the sun,
Mm.
but it will, without doubt, one day. All right.
Yeah.
So, early 70s, late 60s, and early 70s,
Mm.
the management schools had also gotten set up, and
Mm.
they were importing ideas from
The
Harvard,
West.
which Ahmedabad,
Mm.
and IIM Calcutta was in alliance with MIT,
Mm.
and one of
Okay.
the, I believe, yeah. Both these institutions had
Mm.
their function, one area called organization behavior, OB.
Correct.
I think in IMC they called it BS, yeah, behavioral science. IMA it was called organization behavior. Still is called that.
Correct.
And in that, a little bit of OD was being taught. Very
Oh.
little, just an idea. So OD actually accepts and attempts to capitalize on the subjectivity in the organization. And therefore, it's mystical, mysterious, also frightening because it means disclosure, self-disclosure.
I was actually just about to point that out and ask you, how easy was it for the organization to accept the subjective? Because since these are largely Western imports, getting beyond the objectivity and even giving space to the subjective must have been quite a difficult thing.
Yes, but you see, the beauty of it is that while there's a human herd mentality or collective or a, what should I say, crowd thinking,
Yeah.
there are also people who are, in a sense, mavericks who do things differently.
Okay.
And very interestingly, I must directly and openly admit it, it was the public sector fellows
Mm.
who were some of the first earliest adopters. HMT, BHEL, HMT and BHEL, so definitely amongst the biggest users. So also other public sector, the fabulous work they've done. They set up their HR functions. The other organization was State Bank. State Bank had a consultant. If
Mm.
I'm not mistaken, State Bank's consultant was Professor Nitish De from IIM Calcutta. He was director of IIM Calcutta. So they started making these big changes of, introducing the HR function.
Mm.
I've had the honor and the privilege of actually doing an internship program in
Mm-hmm.
State Bank Staff College,
Wow.
3 days internship program, State
Mm-hmm.
Bank Staff College, for all those guys who are transferred or shifted from their line functions in State Bank of
Okay.
India
Mm.
to the HR function. So OD is essentially attempts to, now there are various opinions on it, but for me it was very clear right from the very beginning that OD is to deal with the subjectivity of human beings,
Yeah.
not as a liability but as an asset.
That's very interesting.
Just as everybody wants to be happy,
Mm.
there is a strong streak in everybody
Mm.
which will be ready to act for Sarva Kalyan, good for everybody. Yeah.
Yeah, well-being. In
Uh,
a rough translation could be well-being.
Well-being is a result, but action towards raising wellness.
Oh, beautiful. Mm.
Yeah. So people are ready to do that. People want to mobilize that. But organizations, the way they are designed, actually create what are called unintended consequences. Yeah. So for instance, you will have to have organization design with structures, power and hierarchy.
Yeah, you
The
can't help.
hierarchy has to work through fear. You have to do something to keep that fear within limits.
Mm.
R&D organizations have to have lesser fear. Military organizations have to have high fear. In
Correct.
fact, a few days back, I had a beautiful, wonderful surprise visitor, insistent. He
Mm-hmm.
said, I've heard about you and I have to spend time with you. I said, I don't have the time. I've got appointments, I've got meetings and so on. He
Uh-huh.
insisted on landing up. It got converted into a coaching session. This is a Jain Muni.
Ah, so the surprise is
Shwetambar
that
Jain Muni.
yeah, the surprise is he's a Muni. He's
Yeah,
a
he's a Muni.
practicing. Yeah.
Yeah. He came scantily clad with he was a Shwetambar, so
Ah,
thin white sheet, wrapped around him and wrapped also the lower body with a mask, the whole
okay.
works. And he said, I've heard about you. You tell me what work you do. So the more I tried to explain to him, the less he understood it. And it had to be done in Hindi because he spoke no English. Couldn't give up. So I also said, okay, I'll rise to the challenge. So I went to the whiteboard and with my Hindi, I started explaining to him. There's a slope there which talks about the Daivik component, the part of us which is a Brahma Roop and the part of us which is a Nam Roop. Nam Roop is the one that Sansar gives us. That is what we end up calling our identity. And the Daivik is that which is the energy, the aspirations, our lovability. Yeah. And the awareness that I exist. Right. So as I was explaining to him, so I used the Sanskrit word asti. He said, ये क्या होता है? I said, आप हैं जो. He said, oh, अस्तित्व भाव. I said, wow, what a beautiful phrase, Astitva Bhav is, yes, that is the divine in you. The fact that you exist and the fact that you know you exist.
That's interesting.
So it turned out to be a 2-hour coaching session. And when he left, I said, this man has come and given me a gift. He showed me that I can explain the most complex concept to a person in Hindi. And of course, being a Jain Muni, he is highly evolved intelligence, but in a different direction. So it was a gift, so far as I'm concerned. It's not that he went away taking something from me. He came here, gave me a gift and went away.
Isn't that always the case, Guruji?
Yes, it is. It is. This process of human beings wanting to do something good for themselves and for others is something which can be mobilized. The inevitables and the imperatives of organization designs can inhibit this, will put boundaries on it.
You made a very interesting statement. You said, subjectivity to be used not as a liability, but as an asset or as a leverage.
Our minds have been trained in the Western tradition to essentially attribute a material character. Everything is to be evaluated and put in a material frame. Otherwise, so yesterday I was looking at a video of a very famous young monk, again, Swami Sarvapriyananda.
Sarvapriyananda, he's popular.
He's an MBA. He's an MBA. And after that, he became a monk. He's an MBA from the Xavier Institute of Social Service or Social Sciences in Ranchi. And he became a monk. He's a fabulous, fabulous speaker. And he's an encyclopedia. So he's a hardcore spokesperson of the concept of consciousness. And he's taking the West by storm. He's a hardworking guy. He's read all the literature that's existing. He goes around attending courses on theology, etc. in Harvard. He's gone through a Harvard theology program. And so this concept, what I'm talking about, is actually an Indian concept, which I'm saying, so subjectivity, etc. That's where the skill of an OD consultant comes in. He knows what level of safety the group needs. And in OD, when the intervention happens, I always work with groups. Individual coaching is a rare supplement. Right? The work is done in groups. So confidentiality, etc., is a challenge. And when we come to the science and technology of OD, we'll talk about this in more detail. But it is possible. It is possible to remain within acceptable social limits of personal boundaries. And in fact, you can bring in personal boundaries and honor the space with expansion of these boundaries. So colleagues can become friends as well.
Absolutely.
And it need not be a let it all hang out kind of thing. But emotions are given a valuable place. So when you're asking about this subjectivity thing, Organizations, in some sense, Western organizations by design keep out the subjectivity. So everything is put in with all kinds of structures, making it more and more complex, making it more and more I versus you. And for them to hold, for the Western epistemology to hold I and you has remained a challenge. I've been hearing this for the last 50 years.
Correct.
Yeah. So the simultaneity of the self and system is a clear uh, goal and boundary. So, for instance, you will find even the swastika, if you go to the villages in North India, you'll find swastikas painted on the doors,
Correct.
outside the door.
Yeah.
And on that, Shubh and Labh are written. On
Absolutely.
one side is Shubh and one side is Labh.
Correct.
Yeah. Shubh is for good for everybody, and Labh is profit for myself.
Correct.
These two are not opposing entities.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The system is, after all, the structure, and it is the self that works the system, isn't it? It has to be.
So, OD, in my experience, and mind you, my teacher had said, don't read any books. If you want to be able to increase your understanding, read history. So my OD work is very heavily influenced by the works of Arnold Toynbee. Right? I look at the organization as a social system in addition to it being a purposive system.
Okay, so it's almost an anthropological perspective.
Yes, yes. Western perspective, which is closest to this in terms of the study of organizations,
Correct.
is the works of Erving Goffman. Erving Goffman created a revolution in social psychology, and he used the anthropological method of observation, participant observation as it's called. All right, so it's actually steeped with empathy.
Wonderful.
One of his later books is a book called Stigma, and this byline is very beautiful. Notes on the management of spoiled identity. Yeah, yeah. At the moment I saw it, I said, I have to read this because I think mine is a spoiled identity as well. I thought mine was the only spoiled identity. You know?
Okay, very interesting. Very interesting. Yeah, you please carry on. But I wanted to kind of, this is coming through beautifully together. On one side, we're talking about consciousness, energy. On the other side, we're talking about human identity. How is this connected to the collective? How is this connected to the efficacy, performance? I thought that is where OD was leading, okay, by bringing the important element of subjectivity. Yeah, please carry on, sir. Yeah.
The connector, there's a wire that connects all of this. Now, I don't like the analogy because this analogy says these are all discrete entities. Actually, they're not discrete. It's more kind of a fluid. So in the ocean, for instance, if you go to a place where the two oceans are meeting, you'll find the two have different colors. Doesn't mean there's a wall there.
Correct.
They're interdependent. The currents flow through them.
Correct.
So all these elements which you talked about, the individual, the group, emotions, and privacy, and so on and so forth, they're actually all connected. They're permeating one another. And without take away any one of those elements and you'll create a distortion. Question is, what are the ones that we choosing to give attention to?
Okay.
Right. So as the OD consultant, the attention has to begin with the whole. So when I go into an organization as a consultant, I carry with myself the map of the country and the society in which this organization exists.
Okay.
Because every organization is a microcosm of the macrocosm.
Absolutely.
So when I go to a North Indian organization, a South Indian organization, a Bengali organization, or a Gujarati organization, there's a significant difference. And that's an asset.
Yeah.
It's an asset. So the thing which orthodox management sciences even now has difficulty in dealing with is feelings. And it is feelings where energy rests.
Absolutely.
So organization development is an exercise in bringing about better alignment, better companionship between action, thought, and feeling in the organization. So the feelings that are there, they have to you have to figure out how to help them get articulated, given the due recognition, and again new boundaries must emerge such that a stable picture will come out. So this really means it's not a difficult task at all. It's very easy. The reason why OD, for instance, has not become a rage, which it could and ought to, because it can create it, is the apprehension of the leaders as to
Absolutely.
what unintended consequences will emerge. So I
Yeah.
remember one of the first OD exercises after my
Mm.
first job was with Indian Space Research Organization as a social scientist.
Okay.
Then I went and joined. I got a teaching offer, which was a very attractive one, although at a much lower salary. And I got my consulting assignment immediately on getting in there. I said, "Wow, I've hardly begun. There's a consulting assignment coming along." So went and did some work there. They had a factory, it's a significant organization. The product it manufactured, they were the only ones manufacturing it that time. I can name it, it's so long back. They used to manufacture ferrite
Oh,
antennae. All transistors used to have a ferrite antenna.
absolutely. The soft ferrites, yeah.
So that manufacturing is a dirty business, pollution,
Yeah.
noise, this, such that things. So they were having difficulties with their plant. We did a simple 3-day workshop in which we got all the HODs come together and go through graded exercises of getting to know each other better
Okay.
and developing levels of so I call it broadbanding communication. Use
Broadband
engineering.
communication.
So broadband the communication, and so 3 months later we got a call back from them. They said, "Hey, what have you guys done?" I said, "What have you done?" He says, "Our medical bills have gone down."
Gone down.
He said, "There are people who've been working together for 20 years and who've stopped talking to each other after 10, but they still work. They are now going across to each other's rooms and having coffee together. And of course, our productivity has gone up, profitability is going up. So come and do something with the board." I said, "Wow, this is very scientific." So I said, "I will first observe the board at work, and based on that, I will figure out what to do and tell you." So I observed the board, and mind you, I was a total rookie that time. I was all of 31, 32 years old. I observed, did what we call a process observation of the board as to what was the interaction happening. And if this is the interaction happening, these are the feelings that are being left behind unarticulated. Primary building block of any process work. So I did that, and what came out was that like in all family-owned organizations, there were some 4 family members on the board out of 9. So the other 5 hardly spoke. And within these 4, there was a subgrouping of 3 and 1. There were tensions there. So the board was actually largely working around this tension between these 2 subgroups, between the individual and 3. I didn't know how to put it diplomatically enough. And I made a blunt statement of this. I said, "Unless you people settle down, settle your differences, nothing will happen. So the good that has happened will be unsustainable. You will create tension. That same kind of tension will happen downstairs." All right. So of course they kicked me out.
Okay.
So that was my first assignment.
Yeah.
Yeah. Both the magic and the horror came
Okay.
out very clearly. So you were asking about organizational fitness also. So OD's basic aim is to increase the levels of energy, efficiency, effectiveness, and well-being and health of the organization, all of them. OD works with the whole set. Yeah. So if OD does not increase your client's profitability, there's something that's not working. Or a short-term use is being made. So the OD is being used for political purposes.
Exactly. In fact, I was about to ask you on that. You were talking about the leader, right? The role of the leader.
Yeah.
With the alpha male controlling leader, okay, I mean, being the norm, the fear of losing control, fear of losing order, is that what works against consciousness about organization development as a work, or is that what kind of makes people go against subjectivity?
Well, I'll go back to the same example that I was talking about earlier. Before we started the workshop with the employees, the MD told us, ki, I hope you're not going to make managers out of these guys. I said, then what are they? They used to call them officers or something. What they meant was, we don't want them to become too independent. There was fear of loss of control.
Correct.
Right. This I've seen happening from almost all organizations. It's very few organizations where they are without this fear. There are several organizations which, on the other hand, the leaders who, after going through it, learn, and there are some leaders who go and acquire education outside programs and workshops, etc. And they said, the gain I have gone through, I want the same gain to happen with my men in the organization.
Very true.
That's one. The second is, I believe leadership is all about creating change. The fact is that formal organizations are a relatively recent phenomenon. So let's say about 17th century onwards, so 200 years in terms of collective. So commercial organizations were there. Manufacturing came up later. Idea of leadership was essentially to create stability, status quo. And governments which emerged after the business of kings became less frequent. There were fewer and fewer kings. There were either democracy or some other crazy oligarchy, etc., where small group of people would run the country. Research has shown that organizations use the government as a example and learn from that and imitate that unconsciously. Right. So in various countries, whatever the kind of government is there, you'll find similar things happening in the non-government or private sector also. Things are changing now. Now it's going the other way around. Governments are learning from private sector.
From the private industry, yeah. In fact, I wanted to ask you something very specific. The leader of today is so used to dealing with the objective, is still afraid of the subjective. So what do you think the leader should know about consciousness, about subjective, about energy, about collective consciousness? Okay, so what would be your message to the leader? What is it that he should know?
There are leaders who attempt these things on their own. Quite a few leaders. Some of them do a very good job as well. However, leader himself, the moment he sees himself as one of the men, not as someone who has a special job.
Okay.
He indeed has a special job because his risk is the highest. The higher up you are in the hierarchy, the greater the risk you are facing.
Right.
Yeah. That creates apprehensions. Mine is the greatest risk. So I have to. So playing safe becomes important. Knowledge is not going to be the thing. What can shift the balance for the leader to say, okay, I'll be a change maker, is when he also has confidence and builds up an equation with his immediate support team. So the first thing in OD work, when I enter an organization, I ask the chief, you want the organization to change, which is very good. Are you ready to change? Yeah. Because there where you find it difficult to change is exactly that which is an amplified version. That resistance will be amplified lower down the line. So if you are flex about changing, the organization will change. I can take a guarantee on this. I can take any organization, create change in the organization based on the values and maxims, etc., which the organization creates.
Correct.
Yeah? It's possible to do that change. That I'm confident by now. Any kind of change is possible.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
Yeah.
This is really interesting. In fact, the other dilemma that I have constantly felt people articulating is, how do we integrate this? How do we weave this into the running of an organization?
Yeah.
That is a challenge, and a lot of HR leaders, I find, struggling with that because they are the ones who are supposed to be championing the subjective, championing the consciousness, championing the energy, but they are always, at the beck and call of the objective, at the beck and call of the numbers. And what would your message to them be, or how would you help them understand this?
We are at a threshold of the content of the matter we are talking. The first is the idea about OD,
Yeah.
and much of OD application ends up happening de facto on creating, responding to a conflicted situation. So OD is used for problem solving.
Correct.
All right, once solved, they say, all right, no more OD is necessary. To allow this philosophy to become part of the organization's life, yeah, requires practice.
Okay.
So you practice OD, which means wherever possible, you keep on making those changes proactively rather than after a problem has gotten created. All right, so you practice OD. And that's what I'm calling organization fitness. So it's like I can go and attend a workshop by, Sadhgurus or Ramdev. I can go and attend a Ramdev workshop, come back, I've lost 3 kgs in a week, and so on and so forth, and I'm great. But then go back to my old habits, I'm back to square one. So oftentimes in OD that happens, and the complaint is that, well, we did OD, but, after some time we've gone back to the same.
Correct.
So it's as if it's OD's fault. Okay. That's not
Absolutely.
the case. The case is that it's we human beings, all living entities are creatures of habit. Everything has to become, any change has to become a habit. If you don't change the habit, then there's a tendency to stay with the momentum, the tamasic takes over. The sattvic will say, I understand that anything living is living because it's constantly expressing and changing. And that too has to be a characteristic of the organization.
Okay.
With this organization, the families. So while tradition is essential and important at one level, at another level, recognizing and accepting the fact that living entities have to keep changing because it's through expression that the living entity lives. And the living entity is living because it has an ambience and a context which supports life. I'm living because I'm breathing. My work is expanding because we can have the conversations and dialogues like this. I can learn. So these things cannot be compartmentalized. I'm no longer teaching at IIM Ahmedabad, but even when I was teaching there, I used to have a big sort of challenge to the institute, saying, why are you increasing or taking to a high pitch this need for competition? Competition acquires such an importance in a culture which believes power and conquest is the purpose of life, which is the Abrahamic school of thought. It's an unsafe environment. If I don't conquer it and possess it, I will lose it. So on and so forth. Therefore, the purpose of life is to become stronger and stronger and stronger. Yeah, power. Knowledge is power. Whereas in reality, power is from energy. So even today, the amount of attention that Western social sciences are giving to energy is well below par. And on that count, I feel proud that our understanding is at a different level.
I've always wondered why. Why is the West not really able to kind of figure that out or recognize it? Is it because there is a tendency to treat everything as inanimate in some sense?
Yes. Well, if you ask at the deepest level, this is where I and thou are separate. I and my environment is separate. Which is where the Advaitic principle of saying, can you look at it in oneness? The only way to look at it in oneness is to create the third position, the drashta. Then look at both with the same eye. Solutions will emerge.
Oh, fantastic.
I don't need to kill you in order to live.
Yeah.
Your living is no threat to me. So that is where the difference lies. First time I was struck by this very hard was at the first international conference that we had organized way back in, I think, 86 or something. Yeah, we called it Transients and Transitions. So at the international conference, there was a very prominent participant, a US-based professor. I think he was from Kent State University, if I'm
Okay.
not mistaken. And he had a name Mackenzie. He kept on prodding me, on the sidelines. He says, "How come you guys, Indians, quickly arrive at a conclusion? It'll take me 7 days to reach there. I'll
Mm,
reach there. It'll take me 7 days to reach there. But you guys are jumping to it as if it's the next step. Yeah. So
mm.
you guys are so intuitive. It's so intuitive." Kept on
Correct.
saying. It's very interesting. At that time, I thought it was a special Indian quality of some sort. God knows what. Of course, I felt proud, but didn't know what actually he was. Subsequently, it's become clear and supported now by research. There's a Nisbet is the professor's name. I think he's again one of the prominent universities in US, maybe even Stanford, if I'm not mistaken, where he's done extensive research into the way in which he's talked about East Asian. So he would take a picture, show it to a bunch of mixed students. People were asked to respond saying, name 7 things that you saw in this picture. So the Western students gave almost all of them focused on the most prominent object. And the East Asians' responses had a great deal more on the context.
Oh, okay.
He also quantifies it subsequently in his research and says, net, the Asians pick up 70% more information from the same picture. That's one very interesting, important pointer that is pulled out. The second, so here you see the dichotomy between the object and the context is not divisive.
Exactly.
We're looking at both. And they're not necessarily competing. There's a second part of our epistemology, which was taken very beautifully by Kurt Lewin.
Kurt Lewin, yeah.
Yeah, brilliant thinker.
Mm.
And you will notice that his work also looks intuitive. His epistemology is very heavily based on start from the whole and go to the parts.
Correct.
Yeah. That's exactly the way our scriptures are written, actually.
Yeah.
You take any book, even if you take a small Upaveda like Dridrishya Vivek, the first shloka tells you what the whole book contains and then starts going to the parts. So it's very difficult for people like us with a Western education mindset comprehend what on earth is going on in this book. Then we hit upon the kind of thought pattern which, so after reading chapter 1, I picked up, let's say, 30 or 40% at most. I go to chapter 2. In chapter 2, I picked up 10%, 5%, but I picked up a whole lot more of the first chapter.
1.
It's called the hermeneutic circle.
I have personally, I have kind of seen this as abstraction is one of our big strengths. And then intuitively you extrapolate what you abstracted, okay, and then you build over it. In behavioral learning, I call it the crescendo model. You take from the previous one and you build on it in the next part of it. So the second part actually becomes whole and it expands on the previous part and it learns how to apply the previous part as well.
So this is called the hermeneutic circle. So you don't go straight, you go loop back, loop back, loop back, loop back, and then move forward. This epistemology of is extremely important and much more ingrained in our thinking.
Thought process.
This is also very interesting in the Rorschach test. Also, the responses are categorized according to whole, large parts, small parts, details. So you actually have a code, W, capital D, and small d.
Okay. You mean the ink blot test?
The W, people who have more W responses are people who are more creative. All right, they see the whole picture first, then they go to the details. And people who are detail oriented, more details and then to the whole, indicates a suspicious paranoid outlook.
Interesting.
Yeah. Here's the difference between the Western and the Eastern thought process.
Thinking.
The Western thought process is the one that's created the design of organizations which we are using. So organizations by design have an unintended consequences of operating with fear. Yeah. All right. Now, I won't blame the West for it. Even Indian organization systems use fear. So
Correct.
fear is necessary part of organizations.
Yeah.
And that is where OD comes in.
Yeah.
OD works towards reducing these levels of fear. And the fears are oftentimes are based on what are called unverified hypotheses. These help create conditions for this verification to happen, and then energy gets released.
I'm actually very intrigued by the number of amorphous ideas we have been talking about, the seemingly amorphous, conscious, energy, emotions, okay, and OD seems to be about helping make sense of this, both for the leader and the led. So, what is the science and technology behind it? What are the methods? How do you really do it?
Well, essentially called experiential learning, you create safe settings in which explorations can happen in a group.
Okay.
Yeah. For instance, in my OD work, and I would refer anybody interested to visit my website. I've got a 45-minute documentary film on OD workshops, foundational OD workshops, as I call them, where in the first instance, the group is invited to state its expectations, which is a subtle form of making a sankalpa. So if you make a sankalpa, you're likely to meet it. But speaking in English, it's easier to say expectations. All right?
Yeah.
So I process those expectations as sankalpas and return it back to the group saying, are you in agreement with this? Is this what you're looking for? I said, yes. Always that happens. Second, I ask the group, so this is typically a group of between 8 to 15 persons maybe, get them to work in small groups of 4, 5, 3, 4, 5, depending upon the way. So you split up the large group into the small subgroups. Ask them to talk about their subjective experience of the organization. What are the things that, so sir, write about good things, bad things. So our profit was very good, our balance sheet was very good, and next year we will do this, do that. I said, no, that's not what we're asking you to do.
So the core of the, just to kind of make it clear to people, the core of the methodology is getting people to express, right? It's bringing out the expression, right?
Absolutely. Fear and expression are the two counter forces that are at work.
Absolutely. Expression is the antidote to fear.
It removes the ghosts.
Beautiful. Yeah. Very nice. And is this always structured or is this unstructured?
It's structured.
Structured.
There's nothing called unstructured. Unstructured is a politically convenient word.
But amazingly, Guruji, in every lab that I have gone through, until I kind of went through a few of them, I did not realize the structure in it. It seemed unstructured. Is that the beauty of process work?
Well, the term unstructured came up as an antidote to the end of the Victorian era, which is when OD was taking birth in US. At that point of time, the culture was such that there was no organizational setting or meeting without a explicit agenda and explicit or implicit agenda and structure, means what you can say, what you can't say. Yeah. So they use this term unstructured to let people become easier with their expression.
Okay, but there is a design and there is a structure behind pulling out this expression and getting the ghost to go away from fear, right?
Yes. That design is very simple. We keep asking the question, how are you feeling? Now, that is one thing which is a no-no in an organization setting. You don't ask anybody how are you feeling. What do you mean how I'm feeling? I'm feeling all right.
That's very surprising, isn't it? Given the amount of importance to subjectivity in the Indic culture, Indic wisdom, but culturally we have been known to suppress feelings, right? Why? I mean, anyway, that's another Pandora's box that we.
Yes and no. Yes and no. We also have been indoctrinated about our history.
Okay.
We've been told to believe that the other Indian thinks this way. So we think everybody thinks that way. So there's a lot of dirty politics that's happened here. But fact is, organizations, whether Indian, Western, doesn't matter, is actually a set of arrangements which inhibits certain things. No,
Correct.
as engineers, we know where this idea of number of degrees of freedom. Only n-1 is the number of degrees of freedom, and n-1 is the number of constraints. Then the machine will work. So how do we increase this range of freedom? So that's the basic thing. So I get the people to talk about the nature of the organization as experienced subjectively.
Fantastic.
If it is being done in a group, people are relatively safer. And this is processed into developing what I call the identity of the organization.
Wonderful.
A picture of the identity of the organization. Now since this has been articulated by the whole group and put up on the board, it's a public statement. Now it's not a secret anymore. See what you can do to work towards it right here and now. Here, you 14 people are the organization. So let's see how it works here. That's when we bring it to the here and now. Now, here and now is a basic science. The principle of here and now means what? It is an invitation to bring in your subjectivity. So that's the second part of the science. Third part of the science is that solutions are there inside the organization. People know the truth. In my non-consulting work, where I do my basic research, and in this field, the research, you can go on doing research for the rest of your life and maybe many more lives. The more you find, the more you discover how much there is yet to find. And that's the beauty. That's why I love my work, man. I love my work.
It's never ending.
I can work as much as I did in my 50s. So I have no issues. This work is very, very beautiful. It's very beautiful. I've always said that organizations have 90% of all the solutions they need within their own intelligence. It's rarely that this is not true. If this is not true, then you know there's some devil that's been working inside the organization. By devil, I mean some untruth, half-truth, which has been institutionalized. And nobody's allowed to talk about it.
Correct.
And that is when the organization doesn't have the solutions. There was a client of mine, very big, very well-known organization, where I discovered after some time of working that there was a systematic drainage of funds into the promoters' pockets. Now, when that happens, then the whole organization actually knows it, but nobody dares talk about it. When that happens, it drains your energy. Living with untruth is the source of all stress anyway.
Correct.
You know that. So asatoma sadgama is meant for that.
Correct.
The more untruths you live with, the greater the disease you will have.
Correct.
As simple as that. So the science and technology is this, basically. Uncover the truth without fear, without shame, without guilt, and let it become everybody's task to engage with it. Beautiful. And then each man does what he can.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
So that's what happens, and people love doing it. Because of the untruth, the energy gets frozen. And this frozen energy blocks the potential energy also. Once this frozen energy is melted away, the potential energy starts coming up.
Absolutely.
And people start asking for change.
True.
That is when the leadership's strength is actually tested. Leadership then learns how to dance with it. Then the organization is in great shape. Years of high CAGR, high increasing EBITDAs.
In a sense, I see this popular, ranting that comes, which is we need to come together, synergize, move, etc., etc. But fundamentally, you are seeing it as sum of parts. You are not seeing it as whole. You have to move it as a whole, right? You cannot kind of treat it as sum of parts and expect it to become the whole. Yeah, but the thing is that even here, you are conceptualizing it to a point where for people to understand what the practicality of it will be a challenge. Correct. The whole issue is, can you value people's feelings? Are you valuing your own feelings? Yes. Engineering taught me, at least, your feelings don't matter. Keep them aside. Because that is the beauty of engineering. The beauty of engineering comes from that. But when it's imposed on human beings, it does damage. So that's the whole issue. Wonderful. So kind of summing it up, this whole this effort is to demystify organization development, organization fitness, energy, these kind of concepts. So, what is your message to the leader and particularly the HR leader, okay, who should champion this wholesome philosophy? How do we integrate this thought process into organization?
Can the leader see play in his work? If the leader sees my job is to maintain and be safe, then the organization is headed.
Yeah.
All right. That is like a landlord who has inherited a fort and he wants to get the maximum tourists coming in there and maybe even building up a hotel there so he gets his rent. It's a passive kind of leadership. A lot of organizations run that way, particularly family-owned organizations in second, third generation hands, where the second, third generation has been given a golden spoon, but has also been put in a golden cage. So many second generation, third generation inheritors not enjoying their work. All right. So that's one thing. So for leadership means if you don't enjoy your work as play, then your leadership is going to be a maintenance leadership. So that's one very important thing. Is the leader enjoying his job? So that's also part of the play. Can the leader see the organization not only as an organization like an engine or like an asset which is going to pay the rent? Can the leader see the organization as a community of human beings? If you look at the fact, and let's say you have an organization where there are 400 people working, the leader is actually influencing the lives of something like at least 4 times that number of human beings. So for each person, there's a family of at least one wife, 1 or 2 children.
Yes.
One day he does not smile, and there are 10 people who are afraid as to what has happened, why is that happening, and what, he goes back home tense and anxious. Does he see one of his purposes in life is to bring well-being to these 400 people?
Beautiful.
Let alone the marketplace. So what are his purposes in life? What purpose is he giving to himself?
Absolutely.
So that's one. And then the joy of creating change. I've seen leaders becoming younger. They adopt that. Actually, you can see it on their faces because human beings are human beings at the end of it all. We are all human beings first and everything else later. Leader, HR manager, or anything, or consultant.
Absolutely. This is amazing, Guruji. I think it is such a beautiful, fresh perspective to organization development. All the many of the amorphous ideas, many of the ideas which owing to fear of engaging with subjectivity that we have not been playing joyfully with. I hope people will be able to play joyfully with and probably realize their purpose.
There's also an issue of the era.
Yeah.
We are now fortunately exiting an era of scarcity mindset. So for instance, in the 70s and 80s, one of the standard most frequent problems we encountered with organizations and leadership was playing safe, playing to make sure that we don't fail. So that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So progressively, I see the Indian organizational milieu and ecology there, the socio-psychological ecology, saying people are ready to experiment with whatever they can. Yeah, the scarcity mindset is slowly evaporating, and that's a very, very good sign.
Part of the evolution.
One question which I think has remained unanswered is this business of everything we're dealing with, this amorphous things of energy and consciousness and all that. That is where actually I will have to make a statement of philosophy of management. Human beings are not monadic entities, not like particles in Brownian motion. Human beings are a continuity. We are human beings in an object body. We have needs, etc. But we are also cosmic entities. All right. This whole thing of let's understand us. Like the other day, somebody asked me, "What is your concept of God?" I said, "You raised a question which cannot ever have an answer. The moment you say concept of God, you've killed the question. That means God is conceptualizable. How do you know that? You don't know what is God. How do you know God is conceptualizable? So you'll have to give me an open question. So don't ask me for definition of God. Definition means defining. So how do we live with this whole thing that there's going to be a hell of a lot of things I will never know, but I will go on and live with a commitment and conviction that I will keep on breaking the boundaries of my knowledge. The only way I can do this is to accept I don't know.
Totally, totally.
Right. So if you look at many of our puja paddhatis, particularly the ones that are done after cremation, invoke in nothing else but a huge amount of humility.
Humility, yes.
All right. So when you're doing the Havan,
Yeah,
the Arya Samaji method, for instance,
yeah.
all the slokas are there to accept gracefully and happily your limitations. This whole idea that I will have to become bigger and better and powerful and the best on earth, and I will defeat everybody who comes my way, is an absurdity. It's a joke. All right. So how about being humble? Is there anything wrong with being humble?
The ultimate import of an organization or a collective is joy, not necessarily conquest or not necessarily power. Is a very large message that's coming out. Beautiful.
So
Thank you, Guluji. Wonderful talking to you, and I feel lit up. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I serve too.
Thank you for this opportunity.
Namaste. I hope this opens up vistas for people, and I'm sure it will.
I'm sure it will, because I have great faith in human beings. Yeah.
Great, sir. Thank you very much.